I never thought my life could flip upside down in a single day. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. My girlfriend, Emily, had been my world for the past 2 years. We had shared dreams, late-night talks, and endless laughs over coffee at our favorite local cafe in downtown Austin. But that illusion of happiness shattered faster than I could process. It all started on an ordinary Thursday evening. I was hanging out with my best friend, Jake, at a small coffee shop near campus. We were joking about finals, cracking up over old stories, and sipping on overpriced lattes. My phone buzzed, and I saw a message from Emily. At first glance, it seemed innocent, a simple, "Hey, can we talk later?" smiley face. But something about it felt off. Her tone felt secretive. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking. But then, a notification popped up while I scrolled through my phone. A preview of her chat with Jake. My heart stopped. There it was, plain as day. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I couldn't believe my eyes. My girlfriend, my Emily, had been spending time with Jake in ways I never imagined. Betrayal hit me like a freight train. My hands went cold, my stomach twisted, and the coffee in my hand felt like it weighed a ton. I confronted her that night. "Emily, what is this?" I asked, showing her the message. She hesitated. Her face, usually a comfort to me, now revealed a mix of guilt and panic. "It's not what you think," she started, but her voice trailed off. That hesitation confirmed everything my heart feared. I couldn't sleep that night. Every memory of our time together, every laugh, every hug, every late-night study session, suddenly felt tainted. How could she do this? How could someone I trusted so completely betray me with my best friend? Every little detail about their past interactions now seemed suspicious. Her texts, his texts, the way they joked in group chats. It all started to make sense, and yet it felt like my mind was betraying me too. The next morning, I went to school at UT Austin, but my mind was elsewhere. Every smile, every glance, every casual conversation Emily had felt like salt in the wound. I tried talking to a few friends, casually dropping hints, hoping someone might know something. Surprisingly, a couple of them had noticed odd things too. Late-night texts, unexplained meetings, little private jokes that didn't make sense in the light of day. My anger started boiling. I felt humiliated and furious, yet there was a strange clarity in my rage. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was a lesson. Trust isn't just about words, it's about actions. And her actions had shattered that trust completely. That night, sitting alone in my small apartment in Austin, I realized that I couldn't just let this slide. My anger demanded action. My mind started weaving a plan, not out of revenge for the sake of gloating, but to reclaim control and dignity. I needed to be strategic, careful, and patient. A direct confrontation might just lead to chaos. I needed subtlety. I started observing their routines more closely. I noticed how Emily would check her phone excessively, how Jake would suddenly leave group conversations, how they shared inside jokes that excluded everyone else. Every tiny detail became a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. It wasn't easy. Every day was a battle between my heartbreak and the need to stay calm. I reminded myself constantly that patience would be my weapon. I couldn't let raw emotion dictate my actions. Every betrayal deserved a measured response, and I planned to make it count. That night, lying awake in my bed, I realized that this betrayal wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of my awakening. I would rise from this heartbreak stronger, smarter, and more in control than ever. And if karma had a taste for justice, I intended to serve it. So that's where my journey began. The journey through heartbreak, anger, and calculated revenge. This chapter wasn't just about betrayal. It was about understanding, strategy, and reclaiming the power that had been stolen from me. It was the start of a story that would change everything. The morning after I discovered Emily's betrayal, I woke up feeling hollow. My apartment in Austin felt emptier than ever, the sunlight streaming through my blinds, unable to penetrate the darkness inside my mind. Every fiber of my being screamed in disbelief, anger, and heartbreak all at once. I couldn't comprehend how someone I loved so deeply could disregard our relationship for a fleeting thrill with my best friend Jake. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, my hands trembling slightly. I kept replaying the messages in my head, the casual words that hid such a devastating truth. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." The audacity, the betrayal, it was as if the ground had shifted beneath me and I had no anchor to hold on to. I thought about confronting Jake. My anger flared just at the idea of seeing him. even thinking about the smirk he might wear if I expressed my hurt. But as tempting as it was, I knew impulsive confrontation wouldn't solve anything. Acting in blind rage could only backfire, and I had learned from the previous night that patience could be more powerful than immediate revenge. Instead, I decided to focus on understanding the full extent of what had happened. I started paying attention to every detail, every little sign I had ignored before. The seemingly innocent texts, the sudden shifts in tone when they were together, the mysterious disappearances from group gatherings. It all began to make sense in the light of betrayal. My heart ached, but a new sense of resolve was forming. I would not be humiliated silently. I would not allow them to think they had won. At lunch, I met a couple of friends at a cafe near the University of Texas campus. I tried to appear normal, laughing at jokes and commenting on assignments, but every fiber of me was elsewhere. I needed to talk, but not just about my heartbreak. I needed strategy. I asked subtle questions about Emily and Jake, gauging their responses, hoping to collect more clues. Surprisingly, a few friends hinted that they had noticed odd behavior too. Secretive glances, private messages, and subtle inside jokes that excluded everyone else. It was confirmation that this betrayal was not a fluke, it was deliberate. By afternoon, my anger had turned into a simmering determination. I realized that heartbreak alone was insufficient. I needed a plan. But this plan couldn't be petty. It had to be precise. I began mentally mapping out their routines. Emily's classes, her favorite coffee spots, Jake's habits, and social patterns. Each observation was a piece of the puzzle, and I intended to assemble it with calculated precision. As the day progressed, I found myself cycling through memories of Emily. I remembered late-night study sessions, our long walks around Lady Bird Lake, our weekend trips to small Texas towns. Moments that once brought joy now carried the sting of betrayal. I allowed myself to feel the pain fully, because I knew that acknowledging my emotions was the first step in transforming them into focus and clarity. That evening, I returned to my apartment and sat down with a notebook. I wrote down every detail I knew about their interactions, the times, the places, the messages. My anger gave way to analysis. I started thinking about the psychology of betrayal, about how people act when they believe they won't face consequences. Emily and Jake had underestimated me. They assumed their secret would stay hidden, their actions would go unpunished. And I was going to prove them wrong, not through impulsive revenge, but through calculated strategy. Over the next few days, I observed from a distance. I noticed Emily lingering near the student union, texting frequently, and meeting Jake for study sessions that always seemed to stretch late into the evening. I began documenting patterns, noting every inconsistency. The betrayal had left me wounded, but it also sharpened my mind. I realized I had the upper hand. I had awareness, patience, and clarity that they lacked. I also began reflecting on myself, not in a self-pitying way, but in a way that allowed me to regain control. I focused on my studies, hitting the gym at a nearby fitness center, and reconnecting with other friends. I refused to let heartbreak paralyze me. Instead, I used it to fuel my determination. I started planning subtle ways to reclaim my dignity and turn the tables on both Emily and Jake. One night, as I sat by my window overlooking the city skyline, I sketched a plan in my mind. I wouldn't expose them immediately. I wouldn't confront Emily in anger. My revenge needed to be clever, undeniable, and transformative. I thought about ways to interact with people they cared about, to position myself in a way that highlighted their betrayal while elevating my own strength. The more I visualized, the more the pieces fell into place. Anger and heartbreak had become a double-edged weapon. On one side was pain, the memory of being deceived. On the other side was a sharpened mind, a focus that allowed me to strategize without losing control. I realized revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about restoring balance, about showing that betrayal has consequences, and about reclaiming my own narrative. As the week progressed, I started small. I smiled confidently in public spaces, interacted with friends and acquaintances in ways that displayed my composure, and began subtly observing Emily's reactions. Every glance, every word, every expression became data, evidence of her guilt and my growing advantage. I felt power returning to me, a sense that I was no longer a victim, but an active participant in my own story. By the end of the week, I had a full mental map of their patterns. I knew when and where they met, how they communicated, and which people around them were unaware of the truth. This knowledge became the foundation of my strategy. Heartbreak had transformed into calculation, anger into patience, and betrayal into opportunity. That night, lying in bed, I allowed myself a moment of clarity. I was no longer the same person who had discovered the betrayal just days ago. I had evolved, sharper, stronger, and more determined than ever. The pain remained, but it had become fuel for my plan. I promised myself that when the right moment came, Emily and Jake would see the consequences of their actions, not through shouting or confrontation, but through undeniable truth and impact. Chapter 2 ended with a resolve. The heartbreak and anger were only the beginning. What followed would be a carefully orchestrated journey of observation, strategy, and subtle manipulation. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about timing, precision, and ensuring that the betrayal never went unnoticed. By the time a full week had passed since I uncovered the truth, something inside me had fundamentally changed. The heartbreak was still there, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it had sharpened my focus. Pain had turned into clarity, and clarity had turned into intention. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was planning. Every morning, I followed the same routine. Wake up early, hit the gym near South Congress, shower, and head to campus with my headphones on. To anyone watching, I looked normal, maybe even better than before. What they didn't know was that behind the calm exterior, my mind was working relentlessly. Emily and Jake thought they were careful. They thought secrecy equaled safety. But secrecy has patterns, and patterns can be mapped. I started small. I stopped texting Emily first. I stopped asking questions. I stopped seeking reassurance. That alone shifted the dynamic. Humans notice silence more than confrontation, and I could see it in her behavior. She checked her phone more often when we were around each other. Her tone changed, slightly unsure, slightly forced. That told me something important. Guilt makes people predictable. I began documenting, not physically, but mentally. Mondays and Wednesdays, she stayed late near the student union. Tuesdays, Jake always studied off campus. Thursdays were quieter, probably when they assumed no one was watching. They underestimated how much people reveal when they believe they're invisible. At night, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank notebook. I didn't write names. I didn't write emotions. I wrote objectives. Objective 1, regain control of the narrative. Objective 2, elevate myself socially and emotionally. Objective 3, let the truth expose itself without me forcing it. Revenge didn't need noise. It needed timing. I started reconnecting with people I had unintentionally drifted away from during my relationship. Old classmates, friends from the gym, study groups. I showed up confident, relaxed, and focused. I listened more than I spoke. People gravitate toward stability, and I became exactly that. Slowly, things shifted. People began inviting me out again. Group hangouts, coffee runs, late-night diner trips. Emily noticed. I could tell by the way her eyes followed me in shared spaces. Jake noticed too, his usual confidence replaced with guarded glances. Good. I wasn't doing this to make them jealous. I was doing it to rebuild my position. When betrayal happens, people expect you to fall apart. When you don't, it unsettles them. One Friday evening, I ran into Jake outside a convenience store near campus. The interaction was brief, casual, and revealing. "Hey man," he said, forcing a smile. "You good?" I smiled back. Calm. Unbothered. "Yeah. Busy but good." That was it. No accusations. No tension. And I watched something flicker behind his eyes. Uncertainty. That night, I realized something critical. They were expecting anger. They were prepared for confrontation. What they weren't prepared for was my silence. Silence creates space. And space makes people talk, to the wrong people at the wrong time. I started paying attention to Emily's circle, her friends, classmates, people she trusted. Not to manipulate them, but to understand the social ecosystem. Who talked to whom? Who noticed things? Who asked questions? I didn't spread rumors. I didn't hint at betrayal. I simply existed, calm, composed, visibly improved. The gym results started showing. My grades improved. My confidence sharpened. People commented on it. "You seem different lately," one friend said during a group lunch. "Yeah," I replied casually. "Just focusing on myself." That sentence did more damage than any argument ever could. At home, late at night, the memories still came. The laughter. The promises. The trust. I let them pass through me without resistance. Suppressing emotion weakens strategy. Understanding it strengthens resolve. This wasn't about hurting them. This was about proving, to myself most of all, that betrayal didn't break me. The real plan wasn't some dramatic exposure or public humiliation. It was something deeper. I would become undeniable. I would become the version of myself they couldn't ignore, dismiss, or manipulate. And when the truth finally surfaced, as it always does, it wouldn't need my voice. Their own actions would speak louder than anything I could say. One evening, as I walked along Lady Bird Lake, watching the city lights reflect on the water, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the betrayal. Peace. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Control. Chapter 3 ended not with confrontation, but with preparation. The board was set. The pieces were moving. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't reacting to the story anymore. I was writing it. By the time the 4th week rolled around, I had fully embraced my strategy. The heartbreak was no longer raw. It had been refined into focus, observation, and subtle influence. I had a plan, and it required me to get closer. Not to Emily, not yet, but to someone in her circle who would serve as both a connection and an insight into her world. Her close friend, Madison. Madison was smart, perceptive, and well-connected. She had been Emily's confidant for years, the kind of friend who noticed small changes, who asked questions, who saw through facades. I knew that by forming a bond with Madison, I could gain perspective on Emily's behavior without drawing suspicion. But more than that, building a connection with Madison gave me an emotional anchor. Someone to ground myself while I navigated this tense situation. I didn't rush it. Nothing about this plan would work if it felt forced. I started by attending events Madison liked. Study groups, club meetings at UT Austin, casual meetups at coffee shops. I smiled when I saw her, initiated casual conversations about school projects, music, and mutual interests. I kept everything light and friendly, nothing that hinted at my underlying motives. Madison was cautious at first. She had always been protective of Emily and somewhat wary of me. But over time, she began to respond positively to my presence. I learned about her favorite coffee order, her weekend habits, even her favorite spots along South Congress Avenue. These small details mattered. They were the building blocks of trust. Meanwhile, I maintained distance from Emily. I didn't respond immediately to texts. I avoided unnecessary eye contact in shared spaces. This wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. The combination of my composure and selective attention made Emily notice me in a way she hadn't before. Her gaze lingered more often, her tone became slightly cautious when speaking with me, and even Jake seemed a bit off balance around me. By interacting more with Madison, I gained subtle insights into Emily's recent behavior. I learned about secret study sessions and late-night hangouts. I learned about conversations Emily had kept from me. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that Emily had begun to notice my changes, the confidence, the independence, the calm. She was starting to realize that I was no longer someone to manipulate easily. One Saturday evening, Madison invited me to a small get-together at her apartment. I knew Emily would be there. My heart raced slightly, not out of excitement, but out of awareness. This was an opportunity to observe, to interact subtly, and to assert my presence. I arrived looking relaxed, dressed casually but stylishly, projecting confidence. I greeted Madison warmly and exchanged friendly hellos with others. And then I saw Emily. She tried to act natural, but her eyes betrayed her. There was hesitation, curiosity, even a hint of worry. I didn't approach her directly. I let my presence speak for itself. Throughout the evening, I focused on conversations with Madison and others. I asked thoughtful questions, listened actively, laughed naturally, and maintained a calm energy. I noticed Emily glancing at me repeatedly, trying to gauge my mood, my reactions, my intentions. She was learning, slowly, that I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. And she couldn't control me anymore. After an hour, Emily approached Madison and me, casually joining our conversation. She tried to steer the topic toward group gossip, subtle hints, and inside jokes. I responded with neutrality, a calm demeanor that neither betrayed anger nor emotional vulnerability. Madison noticed. Emily noticed. And I smiled inwardly. The table had subtly shifted. I wasn't exposing betrayal yet, but I was asserting my presence strategically. Every word, every glance, every subtle interaction reinforced my position. By being close to Madison, I could navigate Emily's social circle safely, gather insights, and maintain control. It was delicate, but it was effective. Over the next few weeks, this approach became a routine. I would meet Madison, attend casual events, engage in meaningful conversations, and carefully observe Emily's reactions. I noticed small cracks, hesitation, subtle glances, slight nervousness. Emily was adjusting to the new reality. I was no longer her predictable target. I was independent, strong, and observant. One afternoon, during a casual walk near Lady Bird Lake with Madison, we talked about future plans, college ambitions, summer internships, and personal goals. Madison shared that she admired my focus and growth over the past month. I smiled, keeping the conversation light and sincere. This wasn't manipulation in a superficial sense. It was authentic growth paired with strategic awareness. Meanwhile, I began subtly redirecting conversations in shared spaces. I would ask insightful questions during group studies, offer practical advice, and demonstrate calm composure during stressful moments. People started noticing the change. Emily noticed too. She began to show signs of unease, subtle attempts to assert control in conversations, slight defensiveness in group settings, even a hint of jealousy that was difficult to hide. This chapter was about positioning. I wasn't attacking or exposing them yet. I was becoming undeniable in a way that couldn't be ignored. By getting close to Madison, I had both an ally and a vantage point, allowing me to operate confidently while Emily and Jake revealed their own weaknesses. By the end of the month, I realized a key truth. Revenge doesn't require chaos. It requires patience, strategy, and self-improvement. My presence, my calmness, and my growing social influence were already changing the dynamics. Emily and Jake underestimated how much strength comes from resilience, observation, and quiet confidence. That night, walking back to my apartment, I reflected on the past few weeks. The betrayal, heartbreak, and anger had shaped a new version of me. I was not the same person who had discovered the truth. I was stronger, smarter, and strategically aware. I had a plan, a path, and the patience to see it unfold. And most importantly, I had control, not over them, but over myself and my own narrative. Chapter 4 ended with subtle victory. By getting close to Madison, I had positioned myself socially, emotionally, and strategically. The pieces were falling into place. Emily and Jake were no longer operating in a vacuum. They were under observation, and their missteps would be theirs alone. And as I prepared for the next stage of my plan, I knew that patience, precision, and calm confidence would ensure the eventual outcome. Weeks of planning, observing, and patiently building my presence had led to this moment. I had transformed from someone broken and betrayed into someone calm, confident, and unshakable. Emily and Jake had underestimated me. They thought I would react impulsively, that heartbreak would make me weak or desperate. But I had waited. I had positioned myself perfectly. And now it was time for the payoff, the sweet revenge. It began subtly. I continued my routine, attending classes, participating in club activities, and socializing, but with a new layer of strategy. Every smile, every conversation, every interaction with Madison, and even casual interactions with others in Emily's circle were calculated. People noticed my calm confidence, and their attention began to shift. Emily's gaze lingered longer than before, filled with subtle uncertainty. Jake looked uneasy in our shared spaces. My presence alone started changing the dynamics. The real key to revenge wasn't confrontation. It was influence, control over perception and social space. I didn't need to accuse them publicly. I needed them to feel the consequences of their actions internally, socially, and psychologically. I let them talk, reveal their habits, and make missteps while I remained composed. Every mistake they made, every slip in front of friends or in social settings, became evidence of their carelessness. One Friday evening, Madison invited me to a small gathering at her apartment, a casual hangout that Emily and Jake would attend. This was the perfect setting. I arrived confident, calm, and engaging. I greeted everyone warmly, establishing my presence as someone self-assured and socially adept. Emily noticed immediately, her subtle glances betraying her anxiety. Jake tried to maintain his usual bravado, but it faltered under my composed demeanor. Throughout the evening, I focused on connecting with people, genuinely engaging in conversations, laughing at jokes, and demonstrating calm confidence. I let Emily and Jake speak, subtly observing their interactions without drawing attention to myself. Every word they said, every glance, every reaction was recorded mentally. Their own actions, unaware of my awareness, were setting the stage for their downfall. By the middle of the evening, Emily attempted to regain attention by inserting herself into conversations I was part of. I responded politely but neutrally, showing no anger, no jealousy, no vulnerability. My calmness amplified her discomfort. She was used to controlling situations through manipulation and charm, but she couldn't influence me anymore. I remained untouchable, a silent force in the room. At one point, Emily whispered something to Jake, clearly frustrated by my presence. They laughed nervously, assuming I couldn't hear. But subtle observation revealed their insecurity. They were aware now that the balance had shifted. My transformation, my growth in confidence, social presence, and emotional control, was unsettling them. This was exactly what I wanted. Meanwhile, I continued to engage with Madison and others in a friendly, genuine manner. I avoided drama entirely. My presence radiated calm assurance, drawing people naturally toward me. Friends began commenting on my composure, my confidence, and my ability to handle tense situations gracefully. Emily noticed these observations and tried to reassert herself socially, but each attempt only highlighted her own nervousness. By the end of the evening, the subtle plan had already taken effect. Emily and Jake were anxious, unsure, and socially off balance. Meanwhile, my connections had strengthened, my influence had grown, and my personal growth was evident to everyone around. Their betrayal had set the stage for their own social downfall, while I had emerged stronger, unshakable, and respected. The sweet revenge wasn't dramatic exposure or humiliation. It was subtle, precise, and psychologically devastating. Emily realized, without me saying a word, that I had moved on, not in a petty public way, but in a way that emphasized my own strength, independence, and dignity. Jake realized that his actions had consequences, that manipulation and deceit could not control someone who had regained their composure and strategic awareness. Over the next few days, the aftermath of the gathering became clear. Emily's attempts to engage socially felt forced, her friends noticed her tension, and she began questioning her own choices. Jake appeared uneasy in shared spaces, careful with his words, constantly calculating how to avoid further exposure. Their own behavior, prompted by their guilt and observation of my composed presence, became the reinforcement of my revenge. In parallel, my relationships and social standing continued to grow. Friends admired my confidence, colleagues respected my focus, and my presence commanded attention without requiring dominance or aggression. Revenge, I realized, was most effective when it was coupled with personal growth and composure. My strategy wasn't about anger. It was about asserting control, reclaiming dignity, and letting their actions speak for themselves. By the end of the week, I reflected on the entire journey, from heartbreak and betrayal to patient observation and strategic execution. I had learned that revenge doesn't need to be loud or vengeful. It can be subtle, calculated, and incredibly effective. Emily and Jake had set the stage for their own realization of consequences, and I had emerged stronger, confident, and in control. Proof that betrayal does not define the betrayed, but the betrayer. Walking alone along Lady Bird Lake that Friday night, city lights reflecting on the water, I allowed myself a quiet smile. I had regained what was lost, not just my dignity, but my personal power, my social influence, and my self-respect. The sweet revenge wasn't in public humiliation or confrontation. It was in control, composure, and self-assertion. And it was undeniably satisfying. Chapter 5 ended not with anger, shouting, or chaos, but with the calm realization that patient, thoughtful strategy can achieve far greater outcomes than impulsive reactions. Emily and Jake had underestimated me, and their mistakes had become their own undoing. Meanwhile, I had transformed betrayal into growth, heartbreak into clarity, and observation into powerful, undeniable social influence. After weeks of heartbreak, observation, and subtle revenge, I finally felt a sense of calm settle over me. The betrayal by Emily and Jake, which had once consumed every thought and emotion, no longer had power over me. Instead, I had transformed it into focus, strategy, and personal growth. The sweet revenge had been executed, not through confrontation or humiliation, but through silent dominance, composure, and social awareness. Now, it was time to truly move on. The first step in moving on was reflection. I spent a weekend alone in my apartment in Austin, walking around Lady Bird Lake, thinking about everything that had happened. I revisited the moment I discovered Emily's betrayal, the emotional turmoil that followed, and the weeks of careful planning that led to my subtle revenge. At first, the memories stung, but then I realized something important. Those events, painful as they were, had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I thought about my relationships, my trust, and my self-worth. For the first time, I understood that betrayal does not define the betrayed. It only reveals the character of the betrayer. Emily and Jake had made choices that reflected their immaturity and selfishness. But I had made choices that reflected my resilience, intelligence, and ability to rise above challenges. That realization gave me a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. In the following days, I focused on myself more intentionally. I spent time at the gym, not just for physical strength, but for mental clarity. I worked on my studies, pushing myself to excel academically. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, strengthening genuine bonds. I even started exploring new hobbies, photography, hiking, and writing, which gave me outlets for creativity and personal expression. Each activity reinforced a crucial point. My happiness and growth no longer depended on anyone else. Socially, I continued to engage with Emily's circle, but now with complete detachment. Madison remained a friend, someone I genuinely trusted and valued, but she was no longer a tool for observation or strategy. My interactions with Emily and Jake were polite but distant. They had learned, through subtle social cues and observation, that I was no longer someone to manipulate or hurt easily. I no longer needed to orchestrate situations to prove a point. My growth spoke for itself. One evening, I attended a casual gathering with friends at a rooftop cafe overlooking the city. The Austin skyline glittered in the background, a perfect metaphor for the new chapter of my life. Emily was there, of course, and Jake too. But I no longer felt any fear, anger, or desire for confrontation. Instead, I observed them as one might observe a distant memory, detached, calm, and composed. They tried to interact, subtly testing my reactions, but my composure remained unshaken. I smiled, laughed naturally, and carried conversations with others confidently. In that moment, I realized the ultimate victory. They could no longer disturb my peace. The sweet revenge had already been served, not through humiliation but through self-assertion. Emily and Jake had been forced to acknowledge, consciously or unconsciously, that I had regained control of my life. They had underestimated the power of patience, self-growth, and silent resilience. I had turned betrayal into opportunity, heartbreak into strategy, and manipulation into personal growth. Over the next few weeks, I focused on long-term goals. I started preparing for summer internships, building professional skills, and exploring career opportunities. I spent more time outdoors, hiking through the Texas Hill Country, photographing landscapes, and reconnecting with nature. Each step reinforced my independence and sense of purpose. My focus shifted from revenge or resentment to personal development, health, and happiness. Emotionally, I felt lighter. The anger that once consumed me had diminished, replaced by a calm awareness of my own worth. I no longer felt the need to prove anything to Emily or Jake. Their actions were their own consequences, and my life no longer revolved around their choices. I realized that moving on wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about reclaiming my emotional freedom and ensuring that betrayal no longer held power over me. During this period, I also began helping others navigate challenges in their relationships. Friends came to me for advice, and I shared my experiences, not as a story of bitterness, but as lessons on self-respect, boundaries, and resilience. Sharing my journey helped solidify my own understanding. The greatest revenge against betrayal is not retaliation, but thriving despite it. One weekend, I took a solo trip to Fredericksburg, a small town in Texas known for its scenic vineyards and historic charm. Walking through the vineyards, surrounded by rolling hills and autumn colors, I felt a profound sense of closure. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the subtle revenge had all led to this moment, a sense of inner peace and empowerment. I realized that life was not about who hurt you, but about how you respond, how you grow, and how you reclaim your own narrative. By the time I returned to Austin, I had completely shifted my mindset. I approached every social situation with confidence and calm. Emily and Jake remained in my circle only in shared social contexts, but they were no longer central to my emotional landscape. Their betrayal was a closed chapter, and I was writing a new story, one filled with independence, growth, and self-respect. The final step in moving on was embracing the future without fear or resentment. I started new projects, pursued opportunities one had delayed, and invested time in relationships that brought genuine joy. I recognized that the ultimate revenge against betrayal is a life well lived, full of purpose, confidence, and authenticity. As I reflected on everything while sitting at my favorite cafe overlooking downtown Austin, I realized the truth. Betrayal can break you, but it can also awaken you. It can expose weaknesses, but it can also reveal strengths. The pain, the heartbreak, and even the subtle revenge had all served a purpose: to transform me into a stronger, wiser, and more resilient version of myself. Chapter 6 closed with a profound sense of resolution. I had moved on, not with bitterness or obsession, but with strength, clarity, and empowerment. Emily and Jake were no longer able to influence my emotions or control my narrative. I had reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my sense of self-worth. The journey through heartbreak, betrayal, subtle revenge, and personal growth had led me to a place of true emotional independence. Looking back, I understood that moving on stronger was not just an ending, it was a beginning filled with opportunities, personal achievements, and authentic connections. The betrayal had been a catalyst, the heartbreak a teacher, and the revenge a tool for self-assertion. And now, as I embrace the future with confidence, I realize that the greatest victory over betrayal is not vengeance. It is thriving, growing, and moving forward stronger than ever.